The British Australian community promotes and defends the rights and the interests of all British Isles descended Australians.
We also defend those who have assimilated into Anglo-Celtic identity and heritage.
For those familiar with multiculturalism, this is nothing new. All other groups have their own representative bodies, whether they are for Chinese Australians, Indian Australians, or whoever. This is completely normal.
The big difference is that until now, the majority has had no one to represent our interests. This has now changed, and the British Australian community is fighting for the rights and interests of our people.
Why do we need this? If we went back to the 1960s and asked people around the world who Australia belonged to, we expect that most people would have agreed that it belonged to the Australian people.
Most of them would also have understood these people to be mostly of British Isles heritage, with a smaller percentage of Aboriginal Australians making up most of the rest.
Today this notion is becoming increasingly unfashionable. It is as if Australians are having their nation taken from them without even a shot being fired.
At the same time, immigration is out of control and white Australians are on track to soon become a minority.
The majority never asked for this. It has been a widely unpopular policy, and yet successive governments of both sides have colluded to ensure that it is continued unchecked.
Worse still, anyone who resisted has been attacked, smeared, defamed and gaslit by hostile elites who are determined to continue this process with no limits.
Annual immigration figures of around 750,000 are now routine, and last year only around 7% were from Western Europe, let alone the British Isles.
At the same time, state-sanctioned hatred of white Australians is at appalling levels. School children are being indoctrinated to believe that their ancestors did nothing good, but were motivated by an ill-defined malignancy called whiteness.
We exist to oppose this Anglophobic worldview and the hatred it inspires. We are not motivated by hatred, greed, envy, or short-sighted xenophobia. Rather, we are driven by love of our nation and our people, and a sense of responsibility to our descendants.
To this end, we advocate, defend and protect the group interests of our people, whilst creating a safe and welcoming community where British-descended Australians can come together to celebrate and enjoy our common identity, culture and heritage.
If this sounds like something you'd like to get behind and support, then we welcome you to head over to our joining page and sign up. Whilst the fee is very modest, we are always happy to accept larger donations.
If you have skills that you think would be useful and are thoughtful and motivated, we would love to hear from you. Our contact details are on our website. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to hearing from you, because the battle is not lost, it's just beginning.
Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Anybody in this country doesn't minimize their tax. They want their heads ring.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
The answer is might, because I want to do you slowly. I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching this. If you are watching this live, you can contribute to today's conversation in the chat. And if you are really feeling up to it, you can hit that link to StreamYard and call in, ask a question, have your say. It's talkback streaming. We want to hear from you as long as you're not too shy. So that StreamYard link is there if you want to use it. But the best interviews are the most interactive ones with our audience. So we definitely want to hear from you. If you want to just do the chat, you can do that. And it should be a great discussion today. We're going to do a little bit of history, which is always very interesting, and it fires people up and gets people interested. So it's always a good topic for a Friday afternoon. But let's kick things off the way that we always do, and that's by letting you know how you can support us. And it's by heading to Buy Me a Coffee. Now, if you want to throw us us a few dollars at Buy Me a Coffee, you can head there. It helps to pay for the stream, helps to pay for the website, and most importantly, gives me a very warm and fuzzy feeling inside, which is very important. And we got some big bills coming up with the StreamYard subscription. So if you want to help us out, please head to Buy Me a Coffee. If you would also like to head to our website, please head to commandingthenarrative.com. Now, the website's the best place to go if you want to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. If you want to donate, there's the button at the top. There's also the button in the top right-hand corner for our newsletter. It's a sign-up button. Just click that and you'll get the regular newsletter with all the podcasts. We had a really great discussion last week with Katie McCallum, Richard Storch, and also Mark Neugebauer about Bill Gates and the climate scam and him reversing his position on climate alarmism. It was a really great conversation. We discussed a whole bunch of other issues as well. And of course, the footage of ABG Revival is up there as well. Check that out. We're getting some really great reviews on that as well. So you can find all of that at the website. If you want to read any past newsletters or other articles that I might write, it's also on the website. These two surveys, the Shaping the Future of Australia and also Australian Political Parties survey, are up on the website. Please check those out if you haven't filled in those already. And if you want to know who's coming up on the podcast this week, you can head to the website. I don't know why that hasn't updated. That's got last week's one there, but there we go. That's this week's. So you can head to the website and find who's on the podcast as well. And lastly, before we kick things off with our special guest, I'll let you know about Australians for Better Government. I just mentioned Revival, how we had that event down in Adelaide. Got some really great reviews from that as well. So you can please head to the website and check out all that we're doing at Australians for Better Government. And please sign up to be a member. It's only $35, but it contributes greatly to our movement. The more members that we have, the greater pressure that we'll be able to put on the politicians in trying to achieve the reforms that we're proposing for a better system of government here in Australia. But on today's show, we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be delving back through history about a topic that I think is very interesting, but it's very controversial as well because of the nature of it. But we're just going to deal with the actual history. We're not proposing any views or anything like that. And I've reached out to Dr. Frank Salter, who I've had on the show before. He was previously on episode 19 and 31 of Commanding the Narrative. So you can go back and listen to those previous episodes. They were great conversations that I had with Dr. Salter. But to let you know, if you haven't watched before, Dr. Salter is an Australian political scientist and researcher specializing in biosocial science, which integrates evolutionary biology, behavioural sciences, and social theory to analyse political and social phenomena. He holds a Ph.D. from Griffith University and conducted post-doctoral research at the Max Planck Institute for Behavioural Physiology. My English is really being tested in this one. In Germany, where he focused on human ethology and ethnic kingship dynamics. Wow, I got through that. So let's bring him on. Dr. Frank Salter, welcome to Commanding the Narrative.
Hello, good to be here, Steve. And you survived the tongue twister very well.
I did my best, mate. But we should also point out you're heavily involved with the British Australian community, and we just played their intro there. Now, the British Australian community has no position on eugenics as well. So even though you're heavily involved with them, and I'm happy to promote the work that the British Australian community does, in regards to today's conversation, this is just based on your prior research. Is that correct?
It's my own research. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start off. I mean, I might go to the actual definition of eugenics because maybe some people out there haven't heard of it before. So this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica. It says that eugenics is the selection of desirable here we go again. I'm testing myself here. Heritable characteristics in order to improve future generations, typically in reference to humans. The term eugenics was coined in 1883 by British explorer and natural scientist Francis Galton, who was influenced by Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection. And they were actually cousins as well. And this advocated a system that would allow the more suitable races or strains of blood a better chance of prevailing speedily over the less suitable. So in other language, it's basically the study of improving the human species and I suppose getting rid of lesser breeds, whatever that might be. I mean, is that a fair definition in your mind, Dr. Salter?
Yeah, I think it points to the evil of eugenics that has often happened. I noticed the advertisement, the front cover for this interview was Adolf Hitler, and I think that's appropriate because the Nazis made gross use of eugenics, largely at the rhetorical level, to justify their atrocities. And that was the low point of what I call second wave eugenics. So there have been 3 waves. We're currently in the middle of the 3rd wave of eugenics. Eugenics is widespread in the West. It continues, but under a different name, genetic advice being given at hospitals. And going back to the first wave, that was the formative wave led by Sir Francis Galton, whom you mentioned.
Yeah.
So this was sort of in the 1880s, as Galton wrote a book on hereditary genius, for example, was his first book on the subject. By the way, Galton himself was a polymath who, as a little boy, taught himself how to read and just invented fingerprinting, for example. He just was a genius. But in this case, he combined genius, I think, with unforeseen circumstances, shall we say, because after he passed, it went into a sort of eugenics in which state power tells people how many children they should have, whether it's none or whether it's 10. And the history of second wave eugenics, which we can talk about, is pretty horrific in its effects on civil liberties. But nevertheless, there's more complexity to it, and I think just describing those first 3 waves of eugenics is a good way forward.
Well, let's maybe go back to the first wave, or at least the beginning. I mean, back to the Encyclopedia Britannica. It talks about it going back to Plato's Republic, where he depicts a society where efforts are undertaken to improve human beings through selective breeding, and then it gives also examples of how it developed from since then. But could you argue that an element of eugenics has been, I guess, in human civilization throughout our history? I mean, I know, you even hear stories about the Spartans where they would, I know that was a movie, I don't know how true it was, but they would send their young off to the wilderness to see if they would survive, and only it was survival of the fittest, only the strongest would survive, and then they would use those in their army. So could you argue that an element of eugenics has been taken place throughout our history?
Yeah, I think, and I'd call it folk eugenics, based on sometimes on myth, sometimes on observed effects, and it arose mainly in agricultural and herding economies, where people saw, if I plant seeds from this patch of corn, which grew tall and had lots of product, instead of planting seeds from this poor patch, I'm getting good results from this. So farmers who understood folk genetics tended to do better. And of course, this has reached extreme levels in the selective breeding of animals. If one wants sheep with long wool, or if you want cows with lots of meat, and so on, or producing more milk.
Well, that's almost celebrated, isn't it? Because I mean, farmers talk about the genetics of their cattle or whatever it might be. Yeah.
So, and also eugenics of a kind, sort of folk eugenics, is common to all societies. I'll give you an example. Beauty, for example, human beauty overlaps or correlates with genetic health. Okay, so just by being attracted to a member of the opposite sex in order to have a family and raise children, produce and raise children, and going by the standard of beauty, that has a eugenic effect, because we tend not to be drawn to diseased individuals. Now, that might be unfair, but that's just a fact. Skin quality, for example, a randomly chosen patch of skin on someone's body, when shown to people, as they can sort of predict their attractiveness of the person based on a patch of skin. They have facial symmetry, for example. Facial symmetry is the result of low incidence of disease. So, and facial symmetry correlates highly with attractiveness. So there's folk and elements of eugenics, and most of it's, or all of it, is unconscious. People aren't thinking, right, I've got to maximize the genetic quality of my offspring. I think I'll choose this one, this wife, or that husband. No, I'm not suggesting that. It's just, if these are evolved mechanisms for improving the quality of one's children, or the health of one's children, and so on.
Yeah, I think if people really think about that, they probably realize that they're doing that all the time without even realizing, especially when they were single and they'd meet some people. I mean, I go back to Seinfeld, the TV show, where, Jerry was dating a woman once and she had man hands, or big hands, and he was turned off by that. But I suppose you could make the argument that you could view that as poor genetics, and those poor genetics, are not a problem when you maybe having a relationship with someone, but if you when it had a child with that person, then you start to become concerned about those aspects. So I think you're right. It's a huge thing that we're probably not even aware of. It's in the back of our minds, but it's not at the forefront of our minds.
I think so.
Yeah.
And what modern eugenicists did, beginning with Sir Francis Galton, was to begin adding some scientific theory. Now, scientific theory was pretty poor in 1880, but it improved. So Galton and his colleagues made important contributions to genetics, which is a real scientific discipline. Eugenics is actually a program. In a way, it's an ideology, which rests scientifically on genetics. Okay, so as genetics developed, as these reproductive sciences developed, eugenics became more and more valid, more and more, I suppose, dangerous in its second wave format, because it was using science. And just one point on that distinction between is that the quite understandable criticisms of eugenics, right, the monstrous uses to which it has been put by second wave people like Hitler and so on, is sometimes taken as a criticism of the science of eugenics, but it's not. What is evil, it seems to me, is not the genetic component of eugenics, but the policy, the social policy, especially monstrous when the state begins directing its citizens who can have or not have children. So that's the evil, or in Hitler's case, mass murder, justified using the talk about eugenics and so on. So eugenics itself is either true when it's based on science and false when it's based on myth. And there's at the height of the eugenics movement, namely second wave eugenics, there was a utopian aspect to it, definitely a utopian aspect to it, which we know can lead to all sorts of extreme outcomes. It was believed, Hitler believed, that you could breed people who would look on us, their ancestors, as sort of worms. I think he used that analogy, as worms, just nothing compared to the person that we could be bred to. What science tells us is the species is pretty much what you get, from all our functions and our brain and our hormonal system and so on. Humans can't be much improved. It's possible to improve them. It's also possible to reduce them, but not in any utopian way. We're not going to become demigods, for heaven's sake. Just a bit smarter, a bit healthier, a bit less paranoid, a bit, at the margins.
Yeah, I think that's important to expand because through the research, and I mean, just through general history, we've known that royalty and elites throughout the times have always tried to interbreed to keep their bloodlines going, but also with the view that, they were superior to the people below them, so they would have to breed together, and then their offspring would be superior again. But that didn't play out, did it? And it also had bad effects. I mean, inbreeding, that has big effects on the future children and things like that. So, is it like a defense mechanism within our genetics to stop that from happening? Like, is there a benefit on that side of genetics to have that randomized thing where if two prime specimens got together, it didn't necessarily mean that their offspring would be a prime specimen? And on the contrast, if two, I suppose you would call them, people with bad genes. I mean, I'm speaking generally, but say for example, two short people got together. You see that all the time. Sometimes two short people get together and they have offspring that are quite tall. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, is that random element of the genetics a defense mechanism in our evolution?
I think there are evolved defense mechanisms we have against inbreeding. The best known is the Westermarck effect. So the Finnish sociologist or anthropologist Edward Westermarck studied incest avoidance. And what he found was, he's the one who discovered that if we grow up with someone, a sister or a brother, and if we grow up with them, then as adults, we're not sexually attracted. It's just a brute fact. It doesn't make sense and doesn't sound logical, but the Westermarck effect has been multiply proven. It's been verified again and again. So, and he argued that it was an incest avoidance mechanism. So that typically individuals that you grow up with, your brothers and sisters, share half your genes. So they're the last people you want to have children with, because most bad genes are recessive, meaning you need a copy from your mother and a copy from your father for them to have bad effects. Sickle cell anemia is an example of that. It's a defense against malaria, which when you receive one copy of that gene from either parent, it gives you a sort of some immunity against malaria. But if you get both copies, you get a copy from your mother and a copy from your father for sickle cell anemia. It just means the blood cells are shaped like a sickle. Then you die of anemia. So Westermarck discovered this really important mechanism. There are other mechanisms. For example, people are not attracted to body odor of individuals who are very similar to them genetically. They're not turned on by the odor, but they are turned on by a more distant genome, by a different genome. By the way, they're also not attracted to very different body odors. Right, so the optimum seems to be to mate within your ethnic group, but not a relative. You don't want to marry a relative.
That's a good start, at least.
Yeah. So there are we have some basic adaptations, behavioral adaptations that help us avoid incest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's tackle the elephant in the room first, and that's you mentioned the title tile for this, and it showed Adolf Hitler. I mean, eugenics was growing right around the world. It was being practiced in America, for example, and also parts of Europe. And then the Nazis came along and really smeared it in a negative way. And they also smeared nationalism as well. I mean, nationalism seems to have a negative connotation these days as a result, I think, from the Second World War and the Nazis and how they pushed the German Reich and everything like that. But is there aspects of eugenics that you could probably view as a positive, but they've been held back because of what happened in World War II? Or is the whole idea of eugenics based on falsehoods? I mean, what's your opinion?
It seems to me what we have now is close to the optimum ethically and in tune with civil liberties. What we have now, I call third wave eugenics, is voluntary, key point, voluntary. The state doesn't impose it on you, generally. Okay, it's illegal to marry a sibling. Okay, it's illegal for an uncle to marry a niece. Okay, yeah, the state says no. But outside that incest avoidance, the state does not say, we don't want you to have children because we don't like your genes. We do want you to have children because we do like your genes. That doesn't happen. What happens now throughout the West is that a young couple who've just got married and are planning children can go to a hospital and receive genetic advice. It's genetic guidance. And they voluntarily go because they don't want to have children with a needless disadvantage. And they can go and have their genes tested and tested for the main genetic disorders. This is purely negative eugenics, by the way. It's negative. That is, it's aimed at eradicating disease or avoiding disease. It's not positive eugenics, which is the attempt to increase a desired characteristic that's not a medical characteristic. Hair color, eye color, IQ, personality, this sort of thing, all could be bred for in principle, but that's called positive eugenics. Negative eugenics is the most ethical kind, which is the avoidance of disease. And so this third wave eugenics that we're currently experiencing seems to me to be compatible with civil liberties, democracy, free choice, a small state or the state not dictating reproductive behavior, which is just outrageous. So that's fine. Now, if we go back to second wave eugenics, there's the problem. First wave eugenics is sort of cleared because it was just theoretical, right? They didn't actually do anything. But it was second wave eugenics, I would say, from the 1920s through till not 1945, the end of World War II and the end of the Hitler regime, but into the 70s. Some European countries maintained their government eugenic program into the 70s. I'm thinking of Sweden, for example. Quite extraordinary. So the negativity belongs largely to that second wave period of second wave eugenics, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it. It's typical just myths pushed by our dominant left liberal elites. For example, they portray it as a problem with the far right. It's a problem with the far right. They love eugenics, and that's the problem. Well, not quite true, actually, because in America, where eugenics was first practiced on a large scale, because states, it was not the United States, it was the state, one of the 50 state governments, began adopting eugenics as official policy. And these states were center left, right, progressive politically. They weren't the Deep South, which is close to the far right as one can get, I suppose, on the American scene. So what eugenics was not being practiced or proposed by the religious right, who believed all humans are brothers and sisters and are all human, are all made in the image of God and so on.
Yeah, well, let me, because I mean, what was happening in America before World War II was that they were sterilizing people. I mean, this was really being played out, and the resistance came from the churches.
Yeah.
The churches had a real problem with this eugenics that was going on. So you're
Exactly.
right. I mean, there's evidence of what you're saying.
And the Hitler regime copied eugenics from America. So I don't limit the negative ethical aspects to Nazi Germany, not at all. And there was an even more monstrous, but luckily brief example, and that was the Soviet Union under Lenin and Trotsky. They were enthusiastic eugenicists, not Stalin, who came later in the 1920s after Lenin died. But the initial Bolshevik regime was enthusiastically pro-eugenics, so much so that it set up a eugenics lab in Moscow, which liaised with the German eugenics people. This is before Hitler. This is during the Weimar Republic of the 1920s, largely 1920. So you had collaboration between Weimar Republic and the USSR, and it's sort of bizarre. But Trotsky, for example, the one who believed in perpetual revolution but had to flee the more conservative Stalin and fled to Mexico and so on, he gave a famous speech, a famous address to American communists about eugenics. And he said, our ultimate victory is assured because we can breed good communists. How's that? How's that for you? And he's right. He's right. Theoretically, it's possible to breed people who don't care so much about private property, for example, who are more open to equality and so on, or who are genetically equal. And it's a famous speech by Trotsky. So that is the background of Nazi eugenics. Because what happened was when Hitler came to power in early 1933, all the eugenic legislation was already written. It was there. And it had been written by scientists and bureaucrats under the leftist Weimar Republic in collaboration with the USSR. So what did Hitler do? He came and said, yeah, that all makes sense, and approved it with a wave of his hand by decree. It was not approved by the parliament, which the Nazis really didn't. They wanted to strip power from the democratic process, of course. But just by decree, he just approved it. And these historical elements are generally not known.
Is it because the Nazis took, all the credit for it, you might say? Did they push it beyond where it was? I guess you could argue that they did. But when they targeted the Jews, the Jews are usually regarded as very successful people, very intelligent, they're good with money. You couldn't really argue. Well, what was the argument from the Nazis against the Jews? I know they were trying to say that they were the Aryan race.
It's ironic because what you said is exactly true. Here we have a highly successful, hardworking, intelligent population. And how did the Nazis characterize them? As a eugenics problem. It's absurd. One problem the Nazis had with IQ tests, for example, was that whenever it was conducted among children and so on, Jews did very well. They did very well. And so the Nazis shied away from IQ tests for educational purposes. No, it's the history, the actual history of eugenics shows that the left was intimately involved in these outrages against civil liberties and against life itself. the Nazis certainly liked it because it sort of fitted into their blood and soil ideology. It fitted into their otherwise respectable, in some ways respectable, idea that, well, humans are an evolved organism and so on, which is not necessarily harmful. But they mixed it in with this folk mythical eugenics, which just threw away the science of eugenics, the science that can be associated with eugenics, and brought in myth. You know, the whole Aryan myth, for example, has eugenic elements inherent to it. Here we have a superior people whose genius is watered down whenever they reproduce with non-Aryans. I mean, Aryan is not even a scientific category. But my main point in this area is to push against the myth that this was a problem of Nazism. It wasn't. Hitler or the Nazis basically took on eugenics from the United States. So I think we need to just rethink these myths. Now, why did it come about? My guess is, I don't know, but my guess is when Stalin came to power, he shut all this down, right? He was a true communist, very much like a lot of the academics we have. I don't mean brutally, but
he was happy just to kill everyone, wasn't he?
Yeah, but putting that aside, at the ideological level, he was a true communist in that he really believed that environment determined a phenotype. Phenotypes are the result of environment, when we know, in fact, it's the result of environment plus genes. Both provide information. So, for example, if you plant two fields of corn, one you don't water and the other one you do water, the latter will go up, will be much more successful. Okay, so that's an environmental effect. But if you plant two fields of corn, water them both, irrigate them, fertilize them the same, but one is from a breed of stunted corn and the other is from a breed of normal corn, then surprise, surprise, there'll be a difference in the phenotypes in the actual organism. Stalin was a fanatical communist in that he actually worked against genetics. He hated genetics. Why? Because the Nazis believed in genetics. The Nazis had no problem with genetics because they were right into the biological approach. Now, that doesn't necessarily result in eugenics, but it's consistent with it. And so Stalin had his, the Commissar of Agriculture, for example, called Lysenko, notoriously persecuted genetic scientists in the universities and said, it's possible to grow wheat in snow. That's one of his slogans. And he argued that there were scientific results to that effect. You can grow crops in snow, right? Therefore, Russia, the Soviet Union, will win the race against the capitalist running dogs. This was a mad time. So Stalin, don't forget, at this time, the Soviet Union was running the Internationale, which was a bureaucratically directed from Moscow campaign to subvert the West and turn it communist. And so one doctrine they were spreading was called Lysenkoism, after Lysenko. Lysenkoism, which is everything's environmental, right? So communist thought was quite successful in the West during the 20s and 30s, especially in the 30s and 40s, and then it continued after the war. So in many ways, I think that the Soviet Union won the Cold War in the area of culture, but lost it in the area of economics. So it was doomed to collapse around 1990. But it's not generally recognized that the Soviet Union was really successful in exporting its ideas to intellectuals of the West.
One of the big themes in the chat at the moment is this aspect of God, and I suppose God's creations are meant to be perfect. They're in the image of God. God wouldn't create anything that is imperfect or not meant to be, and then everyone is born equal with equal rights. I've noticed that the countries that you've mentioned, you mentioned the United States, but it didn't happen in the Deep South, which is highly religious. Nazi Germany and also Soviet Russia were not religious. You haven't mentioned the UK, which was, Christianity played a big part in the UK. Do you think that where the eugenics was pursued, fostered more in places where religion wasn't a big, as prevalent as other places?
Look, I don't know, but I'm not aware of scholarship on that precise question. But my impression is that you got it right, but there are other factors as well. So I summarize it as societies that have not crushed Christianity, where the state has not turned against Christianity, were more likely to avoid this coercive eugenics, this anti-human rights eugenics. So I'm proud to say, happy to say, that Britain was one of those Western European countries that never adopted eugenics. The Scandinavian countries did, Germany did, I think France, I'm not sure, Switzerland did, I think. So many European countries did adopt eugenics, with this powerful state telling people, how many children they should have. And in some cases, sterilizing people they deemed not worthy to have children. But Britain avoided that, which is telling. I think the other factor apart from Christianity was strong, a different notion of rights. So the continental system of rights is to say, let's start naming areas that people have the right to, like they have the right to life. That sounds sensible. They have the right to association. That sounds sensible. Britain's very different. In the British common law tradition, you are free to do what you want, except if it breaks the law. So it's a complete reversal of the assumptions. Basically, anything goes. Whatever you'd like to do, you could go to work dressed in red flannel if you choose to, or blue flannel, or whatever you choose. But you can't abuse children, for example. You can't steal. You can't harm others. So it's the common law tradition of liberty. I think is preferable. I don't want the state telling me what I can do, and then I have to maneuver from only do the things that the state approves. No, the state can get out of my life. Actually, you just get out of my life. I'll do what I choose unless it violates someone else's rights or breaks the law.
One of the other things that is popping up in the chat is reference to Freemasons and the Masons, and it seems like everything is blamed on the Freemasons and their influence, or supposed influence. I mean, is there any links to eugenics from that side of, maybe secret societies or the Masons or anything like that?
None that I'm aware of. I mean, none. I've read a lot of eugenics literature, pro and contra. I've never come across any documentation of, or even mention of, a Freemasonry effect. I can't imagine what that would be. Why would Freemasons, who basically help each other get jobs, and also donate to charities, this sort of thing, why would they support eugenics? It doesn't seem intuitive to me.
Yeah, okay. Well, one other question that's just popped into my mind. Now, we know Francis Galton was cousin of
Darwin.
Darwin, yeah, who came up with the evolution theory, and that ran in contrast to Christian beliefs and religious beliefs. I mean, do you think that's an aspect of as well? Where we've got, I guess, two opposing paths where the theory of evolution, I guess, fit in a little bit with this eugenics theory of, I guess, survival of the fittest, improving the breed, and it completely took out that religious aspect. Do you think that, it kind of goes back to the core of this second wave eugenics that you're describing?
I suppose so. I think certainly Christianity, Christian doctrine opposes brutal eugenics, brutal anything. But on the other hand, some of the most successful farmers, including those who breed fatter cows and woollier sheep and so on, have been Christian. I'm not aware of any negative correlation between. The farming community is typically the most conservative of communities. That's why our most conservative politicians are elected from the regions, and that's also applies in Canada, the United States. So I think Christians have no problem with selective breeding of animals, which is eugenics for animals, isn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
And because we're freer ethically to experiment on rats and mice and sheep than we are on humans. Luckily. No, I don't. I think there would be a broad ideological conflict between Christianity and second wave eugenics, but I don't see a doctrinal problem with third wave eugenics that we're practicing now. That's very common now in the West.
Well, tell me what happened. So we have World War II. It all comes out that the Nazis were engaging in the Holocaust and practicing these eugenics policies, I suppose, taking them to the nth degree. What happened after that? My knowledge is that it all went underground and was hidden. Is that what happened with the eugenics, or was
it just ended? No, all those practices simply ended. They were nutty anyway, not just evil, but nutty.
Yeah.
Some of the things the Nazis did were not really eugenic. Eugenic means well-bred, sort of fit, healthy, that sort of thing. So one of their breeding programs was to get SS soldiers to have children before they went to the front to die, right? By the way, all this happened in a compressed period of 12 years. And a lot of the action, this sort of policy I'm talking about, happened in the last few years because World War II ended the Nazis. So I think it's wrong to pay too much attention to this shocking example of eugenics, but you're asking the question. So I think that they really didn't practice eugenics. Actually, what they did was use the rhetoric of eugenics about good breeding and weeding out and all that sort of thing to further their racist goals, their chauvinistic goals. They just use it sort of as an excuse. It didn't actually guide their actions.
Yeah. Okay. Let's switch gears into genetics as opposed to eugenics. Is what happened with the Nazis and the eugenics? Well, I guess the way eugenics was viewed so negatively after World War II, did that impact the study of genetics in any way?
Oh, it certainly affected some people. Some people felt threatened by the political correctness police. The example I raise is one genius in genetics, William Hamilton, whose 1964 paper on altruism, the evolution of altruism, revolutionized our study of ethnicity and social behavior. And he, in his memoirs, he said, I have to confess to being a coward, because when I was doing my it was his doctoral research that led to this famous paper in 1964. And he said, because I've been a coward. I was afraid of being called a racist because of the whole that whole World War II experience. And it wasn't, by the way, it's not this, the effect of the war and the examples of shocking things the Nazis did, that didn't simply cause the reaction against genetics and eugenics and so on. You also had active players in there on the left pushing the Stalinist line about that genes don't really exist and environment can do anything and you can grow corn in snow and all this sort of nonsense. So Lysenkoism, that's the doctrine, the name of the doctrine commonly given, Lysenkoism took off in the social sciences in the West after World War II. It helped consolidate far left control of our universities, which were now suffering from big time social sciences and humanities. And that was where my own research was. I had to leave Australia to make a career because I studied, as you said at the beginning, biosocial science. How does human biology affect politics and society? Simply not studied at Australian universities. I had to go to Europe. And that has had a really strong effect, negative effect, I think, on the rationality of political debates, and has underpinned the emergence of political correctness nowadays called woke or wokeism.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I've got a question here from Martin Taylor. This one's interesting. He said, Australian eugenics was achieved during the 1950s through White Australia policy where immigration was highly selective. Is he confusing two separate things, or is he correct?
I think so. I know what he's getting at, because diversity, ethno-religious diversity, is a disaster. It's a catastrophe. So the White Australia policy, although it was not perfect and it was badly, in some ways, the wording was of the legislation, the legislation underlying it is not perfect and so on. Nevertheless, overall, it had a beneficial effect in keeping diversity down. Diversity is a terrible thing. We have to find humane solutions to, like the White Australia policy. But that's not a matter of eugenics. The White Australia policy was not a policy of only allowing in superior specimens. Not at all. It was an ethnically targeted policy for keeping ethno-religious diversity down. So I think that's a misunderstanding of terminology there.
But don't you think that is a good highlight of how potentially this whole idea of that the two separate things have been co-mingled, and people make the mistake of thinking that if you want to keep your society all white or all Asian or whatever it might be, somehow you're practicing eugenics. They're two separate things, aren't they?
I think that's disappeared. It might have been effective in the 1930s when the reputation of eugenics was at its height. There had not yet been these monstrous crimes conducted in its name. So, and it had this utopian aspect to it. Oh, if only we could breed humans like we breed our cattle and our sheep, everything would be better. No disease, and we'd all be superior. We'd all be superior together. This sort of nonsense. No, I think it is a genuine confusion, and it shows how these ideas are all mixed up, and that's because of the education system. The education system is in Australia and other Western countries is dominated by the left, and it's not for any intrinsic reasons. It's just a product of ideological competition.
So I guess to summarize, I mean, to go back, so you're making the point that this eugenics movement from the second wave was being driven, I guess, by the left in big instances until Stalin came along and he took it all in a different direction. But it can't just be blamed upon the Nazis and Adolf Hitler, can it? It was something that was being practiced leading up until World War II, and it wasn't something that was specific to the right. It was, it was practiced on the left as well.
I think it was generally born by the left. Obviously, Hitler was not stereotypically leftist, although he was a socialist. He was a big state, coercive state socialist.
Yep.
Who didn't believe in freedom of association or freedom of religion and so on. So in many ways, he was actually on the left. But let's just leave him on the far right for the time being. Nevertheless, eugenics was, for most of that period, that interwar period, and then after World War II, it was a leftist phenomenon, right? With rare exceptions such as Nazi Germany. So again, we're stuck. We seem trapped in these stereotypes. That one eugenics can do. The eugenics is basically a far right policy area. It can be, but it's not always. And it can have these wonderful effects, unreal effects.
Okay, so to finish up, I mean, is there any final point that you want to make with eugenics? If you were to speak to a young person who has gone through the education system, what is the main point that you'd like to make to them in regards to the history of eugenics?
I'd recommend just distinguishing negative eugenics, that's the avoidance of disease in our children, from positive eugenics, which now that we have technology such as CRISPR, which allows us to just at will edit genes, edit a genome. So I think we're entering a dangerous period of where the wealthy, and this is an argument I've made in a series of articles called Eugenics Ready or Not. And the thing to be cautious about, it seems to me, is the rise of positive eugenics, initially by wealthy individuals, right? And then on a mass scale, potentially on a mass scale. So I see this as a risk that's sort of, in a way, inevitable, and therefore we need smart people to start thinking about how to avoid that. It's going to be very difficult to avoid. What I would like to see is where eugenics is limited to negative eugenics, not people choosing hair color or height, but the state should say, it must be medically relevant. And even then, the new technology is becoming so powerful, not perfected by the way. It's, for example, modern eugenics involves in vitro fertilization. Children who are conceived through test tube fertilization, there might be some issues with them, with vigor and so on. I wish them the best, and I'm not aware of the latest statistics on the matter, but it's difficult to fiddle with such a fine-tuned biological process as conception without making mistakes. So I personally think this is a technology to stay away from, and certainly take action as a citizen to prevent governments from enforcing in any way.
What about the idea of transhumanism, the idea of merging humans with machines to I guess, improve our lifespan or improve our speed or strength or whatever it might be, our intellect, or even merging with AI? Could that be viewed as a type of eugenics in any way?
I think so. Like, we have the technology now to produce a human with some salmon genes, so that we can swim in freezing water without our blood freezing. Because some fish have an antifreeze chemical in their blood. I mean, I can't think of anything more monstrous, especially if my child had fins and fish eyes. But putting that small joke aside, we can do all sorts of things. We could put in genes from a plant species or from an animal species into the human mix. So the potential here for evil is tremendous. And so far, the system is holding up. It has to be voluntary, non-coercive by the state, a leaning towards, or rather a leaning against positive eugenics, and so on. So far it's working, but it's still operating on a minuscule scale. Part of the risk, in my mind, is that the eugenics, negative eugenics, the safest kind, will nevertheless become an issue when practiced on a whole population scale, right? Because it will then open up, will prepare the way psychologically for people to adopt positive eugenics, and then all bets are off. Once that's there, transhumanism becomes possible, because you can take genes from a salmon.
Yeah,
I want my child to be a great swimmer across the English Channel in winter. People can have crazy ideas, and if they're allowed to express them and put them into action, it could be disastrous, at least for some individuals.
Well, I think that's why history is so important, because I mean, they say that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and we're facing a lot of the issues I guess they faced in the past, and we need to be able to learn from that. But we need an honest discussion of history, of what really happened, without all the ideology and false narratives and whatever it might be. So thank you very much for coming on today, Dr. Salter, and giving us a bit of a taste of the true history of eugenics. I mean, it is a very interesting area. I know we started off by saying that this had nothing related to the work that you're doing with the British Australian community, but we should at least talk a little bit about the British Australian community, because you are growing. You had a very successful event in Brisbane, the BACPAC, which I attended. That was a great event. It did get some controversy from a few of the speakers. But do you want to just, I guess, take this time separate to the discussion that we just had on eugenics and speak a little bit about the British Australian community and what you're trying to achieve there?
Oh, thanks for that, Steve. Yeah, I just make the fundamental point that what the BAC, the British Australian community, what it is a multicultural group that, instead of representing a minority, represents the interests of Australia's founding majority. I find it outrageous and very telling that there's not other groups like this. There should be hundreds of groups like ours, jealously guarding Anglo-Celtic Australians and all those who are assimilated to that mainstream against defamation. Group defamation of Anglo-Celtic Australians is common. Old, pale and male, for example, is a radical statement. Examples come up daily. There are other group interests that we care about. For example, we ran a campaign called Name Back, where we protested against the desecration of statues of our great Anglo-Celtic ancestors. You know, Australia was built, was settled, colonized, created 6 colonies, flourishing colonies, some of the most successful countries in the world, got together in the 1880s and formed the Commonwealth of Australia, which kicked off in 1901. So we've got a lot to be proud of, and our children should understand who they are, what their ancestors did, and we should not accept defamation of Australia's founding majority, just as other groups should not be defamed. So that's the main thrust of the BAC, and we find our work is cut out for us. We're currently preparing a second name back campaign, which will look at not just at statues, but which will look at there's a big movement a big push, especially in Victoria. They're changing 6,000 place names from European names to Aboriginal and multicultural names. So there's an assault. Bribie Island, for example, I did my doctoral research in Brisbane, so I was aware of the Brisbane environment. And there's a big island off the coast just near Brisbane called what used to be called Bribie Island. It's been given an Aboriginal name now. Now, I'm not aware of any democratic process that preceded that. I'm not aware of a local referendum, say, for that region to say, do you want to change the names of the places, the water places, the hills, and so on? And there's, already over 60% of place names in Australia are already Indigenous. That's what our ancestors felt was reasonable. It seems reasonable to me. It could be a bit more, a bit less, but it's not as if we've extirpated, erased the local identity of the Indigenous people. By and large, their place names were kept. And also in our culture, we have the boomerang, we have the kangaroo, we have all these names of implements and animals and plants, which have been kept. And now there's this trend on to this. There's obviously a campaign to erase the identity of the explorers and the pioneers who built modern Australia. Unreasonable. So if you want to push back against that, for example, push back against the daily outrageous recital of the acknowledgement of country, which every school does every day, every school day, and it simply omits the identity of Australia's founding people. Again, an outrage which I think is Anglophobic. It's actually expresses contempt for the people who made modern Australia. So there's something else we are resisting. We've come up with our own acknowledgement, by the way. We call it with the acknowledgement of country. By the way, you might have heard it recited at the beginning of the name of the bacpac meeting in Brisbane. But our acknowledgement, where we acknowledge our ancestors, also acknowledges Indigenous Australians and gives them the credit for being here first. They were here long before us. So it's an inclusive, balanced acknowledgement of nation that we recommend be used in the schools and before public meetings and so on, instead of this Anglophobic one we have now. So thanks for that opportunity, Steve.
No, I think it's a good point. I think everyone knows it, at least instinctively, that there's a big celebration of Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal history, and there's a big celebration of immigrants and the immigrant culture that has been added to Australia, but there's no celebration of the British settlement. And to think that these people arrived here, traveled, the distance of the planet to get here on rickety old wooden timber boats, and they built this civilization that we now live in. I don't even know how they did it, and the challenges that they faced to do so. I mean, we should be celebrating that, and it's a huge achievement of not just the British, but of humanity. We need to acknowledge that and point that out.
It's
so
phenomenal. The achievement is phenomenal. For example, I just came across this the other day. The first fleet was 1788. It took something like 55 years or 60 years for the first steam train, not just steam train, but a train service from Central in Sydney to Parramatta in the outskirts of Sydney. I think it was mid 19th century, a train service operating. Now, how could that happen? Well, it happened because we were pioneered and settled and colonized by people who had just invented the Industrial Revolution. That's why. So, we've Australians' understanding of who we are is impossible without an understanding of what Britain is, what Europe is, our original home cultures. So, but that's simply not part of the curriculum at schools.
Yeah, and it's such a shame because it could fill our youth with a great amount of pride. I mean, even immigrants that come here or who were born here, I mean, they should feel pride in that as well, because I mean, it doesn't matter what the color of your skin. It's just the actual humanity of it. That they were humans that they were able to achieve this. I mean, I think that definitely needs to be celebrated. But that's I think the British Australian community definitely has a place, as it said in that individual cold open that I played. There's a lot of other immigration groups out there that represent different groups and races and things like that. But there's nothing for the Anglos. So I mean, I think that's acceptable for the British Australia community to be out there and advocating for the position, or as you guys say, that the founding group in this country. And if you want to find out more about the British Australian community, you can head to their website, britishaustraliancommunity.com.au, and check out their website. You can sign up to be a member. And just as with the British Australian community and Australians for Better Government and Let's Rethink Renewables and any other group out there, the more members that these groups have, the stronger that they will be. And they're all advocating for all you, the people. They're advocating for your interests. And for them to be successful, then you need to get behind them and support them. So I do encourage everyone to check it out. If they're interested, you can also follow them on social media. The quality of your videos is top notch, I have to say. I mean, the stuff that you put out there, I know you have a lot of very young guys in the background that are very hardworking and they're very talented. So you're very lucky to have them there, and the quality of the stuff that you put out on the social media side, but also on the academic side from your brain there, Dr. Salter, is definitely worth checking out. So I do encourage everyone to go along. And how much is the membership of the BAC?
Well, I've got a tip here. It's $25, which is a few cups of coffee, but it could be going up in the future. I have a little birdie which has told me a bit of a hinted in my ear. The rate could be going up in the future. So if you race in now, you get in for half the price.
Yeah. Oh, very good. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Salter. I've found this very interesting, as I always do with our chats, and whether it be on the podcast or on the phone. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and hopefully we can get you on again in the future to discuss a different topic. But for everyone else, thank you for watching. Please head to commandingthenarrative.com and sign up to the newsletter to keep up to date with everything that we're doing. Like, share, subscribe, put a comment in these platforms where you may be watching this video. It helps to boost the algorithm and really gets this information out there. But for now, we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.